Good afternoon. Our program is about to begin. Please take a seat. Our program is about to begin. Thank you.
Is this on? Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to start our last plenary session, which is curated by The Atlantic. It will be moderated by Ron Brownstein, who's the senior editor for The Atlantic. And our speakers for this plenary will be, well, actually returning, Judge Shannon Baldwin of the Harris County Criminal Court, Chris Gundu, founder and executive director of the Texas Jail Project, and Sandra Guerra Thompson, Newell H. Blakely Professor of Law, University of Houston Law Center. Please join me in welcoming our final plenary session.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us till the big finish, and for joining us this morning. We have a lot of people here from Texas and Harris County, but we also have a lot of people here from all around the country. So I think it would be good if we just start by explaining, maybe talking a little bit about the history of how Harris County has come to pursue this very ambitious bail reform in misdemeanors, and the lawsuit, the O'Donnell versus Harris County, that precipitated it. Professor Thompson, maybe you could start and talk a little bit about where, how this all got underway?
Sure. So the lawsuit, and I had nothing to do with the lawsuit. I just want to be clear about that. My role in all of this is that I currently serve as deputy monitor for the O'Donnell consent decree, which settled the lawsuit. But it was brought by Civil Rights Corps, and these are, some attorneys who filed a class action on behalf of Miranda O'Donnell and other people like her who were arrested for low-level misdemeanors. Miss O'Donnell was a single mother, had a small child at home, and she was, put in the Harris County Jail, could not afford the bail that was set. And so she sat in jail, and her child was not, they didn't know where she was or whatever. She was supposed to be picking up her child, and so it was a real problem. So this lawsuit was filed on her behalf, arguing that this system was unconstitutional, that it discriminates against the poor. On this basis, because under the system as it operated, everyone who was charged with a crime was set a bail according to a schedule, not according to how much they could pay, but according to a fixed monetary schedule. And very, very few people were allowed to be released without having to pay. And so the lawsuit challenged this, and Harris County in 2019 agreed to enter into this very extensive and detailed consent decree to change the system.
And just to be clear, this was a federal lawsuit.
Correct, yes, federal lawsuit.
And I think many people just would be kind of surprised that it survived the Fifth Circuit, which is considered the most conservative, probably, circuit in the country. How did this how did this go through the legal process in this way?
Yeah, sure. So we get this question a lot, and when the case did go before the Fifth Circuit, it was, approved, and the consent decree was finalized, and then we were brought in as monitors. Now, subsequently, there was also a lawsuit in Dallas County on a similar issue. There has been one that was also settled in Galveston County. And then there was another Harris County case having to do with the federal, federal misdemeanor
Federal
case.
misdemeanor or felony?
Felony. Felony misdemeanor
Right.
is what I'm trying to say. Felony cases. And so what ended up happening is that at a later point, the Fifth Circuit decided on different grounds that it was not acceptable to sue judges in the way that these lawsuits were doing. And so they threw out the Dallas case, and subsequently Judge Rosenthal here in Houston also threw out the Russell case, which was the Harris County felony case. So if O'Donnell was going through the Fifth Circuit today, it would not survive.
It has. So Judge, by the way, we are going to bring in the audience at the end for questions, so if you have some, start thinking about them. We're going to talk about a lot of the specifics. The reports that Professor Thompson and others work on are incredibly detailed, but let's start with the overview. Sitting from where you sit and your perspective on this, what have been the principal achievements of the consent decree, and what are the concerns, if any, about the way it is operating?
Well, the principal achievement overall is that poor people are not in jail simply because they're poor. And they don't have to compromise their rights, their ability to fight their cases because they can't afford to get out. That's the overall goal, right? The whole point of it being it's unconstitutional to be held and not have that opportunity. Plenty of people were just lives, exploding before their eyes, right? Because they're stuck in jail, they can't do anything, and it's a misdemeanor case. We have to put that into perspective, right? So the maximum amount of punishment up to 12 months, and if you could imagine being charged with a theft, and traditionally at that time, say you're charged with shoplifting theft, the amount is, I don't know, $200 or so, your bail might be 3 times that amount. Not based just on, not taking into consideration, your financial status, the fact that the bond should not have been oppressive in the first place or punitive in nature in the first place, merely to secure your return to court, but it was forcing people to stay in jail and hence forcing them to take pleas, quite frankly, in order to just get out of jail.
Yeah, we'll talk. Go ahead.
I was going to say, can I back up for a
Yep,
minute
you
and
can.
address one of the things? So in 2018, I was elected in November of 2018 along with a number of other judges. What happened in that moment, because the O'Donnell had already began, but there were obviously other judges there where we swept that entire court. So all 15 were up for election at that time. All 15 of those courts got new judges. So the moment I was sworn in, I became a defendant in that lawsuit. Literally swearing in, we stepped off the stage, we immediately dropped all appeals and with regard to O'Donnell, and that set us on a course to start creating the consent decree. And then we worked to get it done. So that, it was like one of the first actions I took as a judge, myself and my colleagues.
Thank you. When a judge says, can I intervene, usually you say yes. I know that much. Krish, same question. Your sense of what the consent decree has accomplished and what are the biggest concerns remaining as you see it?
So Ron, we were never looking at the success of misdemeanor bail reform. Our organization is grassroots, statewide. We look at jail conditions and what happens in the 244 county jails that are spread across 254 counties, right? So we were never actually looking at what was happening with misdemeanor bail reform in Harris County until we started watching this misinformation and narrative in the media that talked about, this is on Fox News every night, there's breaking bond. And we were like, what are they talking about? We've just had misdemeanor bail reform. We had not had felony bail reform. We've only had misdemeanor bail reform. But there's this huge conflation between the two, and the narrative was that people are breaking bond and going on to commit, more heinous crimes. And like the judge said, these are just misdemeanors, criminal trespass, criminal mischief, theft under 750. It's just really, really minor level crimes. So last year, we started actually standing on the steps of the jail to talk to people who were being released on general order bonds as part of the O'Donnell consent decree. And what we found was astounding. Like, people were out within 24 to 48 hours. And they were all saying, I'm grateful that I'm able to keep my job, my kids, my family, my car, my business, my small business, going back to the tax base. And there was no more family separation, and people were not having to take coercive plea deals and have a record. And that was astounding, but also it was sort of mundane, like the mundane face of successful bail reform, but you don't see that on TV.
Well, I was going to say,
because it's not sensational.
That's, we've talked about this at other sessions in other parts of the country. The failures are very visible. When someone takes an opportunity to avoid excessive time in jail and goes out and commits another crime, that is very visible at 10 o'clock, leading your local news. When someone takes the opportunity, goes home, gets a job, provides for their family, it is invisible. I mean, there's just a structural imbalance in the way anything in this area is presented to the public. You're nodding your head.
I'm nodding because the thing that just galls me is that most of the cases that are highlighted are people who got out on surety bonds, who paid a lot of money to get out of jail. They're the one, in felony cases to begin with. So they're not talking about people who got out on misdemeanor cases, with a PR bond. They're talking about people actually who broke bond, but it was a financial bond. And so the reform they want are financial bonds. but they're just proving that that's not really the right way to protect the community. Like, just putting money bonds on people doesn't ensure safety at all.
Right, money never made anybody safe. I mean, that is clear, right? The murderer who could afford to get out of jail, arguably, are you safe from that person in the community? But really what it was about, as far as the media take on it, was promoting fear. They promoted fear so much that it never mattered what the truth was. And they constantly said, okay, this person got out on bond for whatever reason. Maybe they had an initial misdemeanor case, say a DWI, and that person then gets out on bond and somehow commits murder later or something to that effect. And that had to be a direct relation to bail reform. And no one ever, because it sounded good, and because it went along with a fair amount of emotions, to get that emotion out of the community, it just took off and exploded. And what at one point was, lauded as one of the most monumental things, i.e., misdemeanor bail reform, all of a sudden became the villain and the new political talking point.
Well, let me ask you, President Thompson, because the report, there's a tremendous amount of detail in this report for anybody who wants to understand how this is playing out. But the report found that the share of people arrested for misdemeanors who had a new criminal charge filed against them within a year did not go up after bail reform, but it did not go down either. I'm just wondering how to interpret that. I mean, you would clearly, if it was going up, that would be a concern. But is the fact that it's not going down a concern?
Well, I mean, we would like it to go down, of course, I think. But another thing to note is that there are fewer people being arrested.
Yes.
And there are fewer guilty pleas. We're having more people are able to challenge their cases, and we've had a problem in Harris County with charges being filed that had no merit, and a lot of those are getting dismissed now. It was actually on the front page of the paper today. So, those are cases where we would have had convictions in the past. But again, I think it is a success story that we have shown you can release. We turned things on its head. Yeah. It used to be that nobody got released without paying money, and now it's the case that almost everybody gets out on misdemeanors without having to pay money. And the story was, oh, well, that's going to make crime go through the roof.
Well, in fact, the magnitude of that,
and
right?
It hasn't.
Before the reform, 90% of the releases were secured bonds.
Correct.
And now after, it's 90% are either personal bonds or you've completely inverted it.
Yep.
Yeah, now, Chris, let me ask you this. One, looking again from the report, people identified as homeless or mentally ill were much more likely to be rearrested within a year than the overall population. I think it was 40% was the figure in the report. What does that say about the system of supports that is available? Even if you are not keeping people in jail, 40% of homeless 40% of homeless people who are arrested on a misdemeanor charge are rearrested within a year on something else.
We could talk about this whole day because
it's a whole other
conversation. Because Harris County Jail, as many people may know in the county, is the largest confiner of people with mental illness in the state of Texas. Some people will say provider, but I refuse to say provider. It's the largest warehouse confiner of people with mental illness. Not a state hospital, not a psychiatric hospital, but a county jail is the largest population of people with mental illness and developmental disabilities. And what it says to me is how, as a community, we've decided to invest our resources. We invested our resources in a punitive system instead of a public mental health system. That's what we've done.
How does this play out in your courtroom?
That is a daily struggle. There's no way in a county as large as we are, 4.8 million people, that we can accommodate what we face on a daily basis. I think we do the best we can with it, but the truth of the matter is that while there's this desire to want to get people out of jail and release them, releasing someone who actually needs more resources, we know is a route to just circling them back to us. It is frustrating, it is difficult on a day-to-day basis, and I will not tell you that we're prepared for it, we are not. But we're still trying to stay in the same vein. Obviously, we're committed to bail bond reform, so that's still very important, but with whatever limited resources we have, courts are just trying to do that as much as possible. We're seeing the expansion of cases in terms of time, because that's going to back up in terms of trying to at least get psychological evaluations done, connecting them to our public defender's office, who has resources for the mental health. They have a mental health division, so we are trying to funnel as much as possible through them too, and so we'll have supervised release where we're releasing them, ideally to give them some specialized treatment.
Do you see people 6-8 months later?
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure, but at least we can get them a start. That's a place, quite frankly, where funding needs to just be funneled into as much as possible.
Yeah, if I could just say though too, I think we need to be sure people don't get the wrong impression, because Houston and Harris County have been a national model for dealing with the problem of homelessness. And we've had, again, national stories about this city-county cooperation, the fact that, the Coalition for the Homeless has this data system connecting all the providers, and they have done a remarkable job of reducing the population overall. that has impacts for us, right? That's been really important. So yes, the percentage of homeless people who reoffend is greater, but the overall percentage of homeless people going through the system has gone down.
It has.
It has gone down. And the crimes that they're charged with are not violent. 14% of their cases are trespass.
Right,
So
criminal trespass.
it's really just that they have nowhere to be. That's the crime. And so, you know, it's a good news, bad news situation, and we've got to continue the struggle to try to find adequate shelter and find other means of dealing with it. But overall, we're doing very, very well.
Let me stick with you. We've alluded to this several times. The number of misdemeanor cases in the county are declining, right? It was 60,000 in 2015 to about 50,000 in 2023. The number of guilty pleas, according to the report, is plummeting. The 2023 report, while 33,644 misdemeanor cases filed in 2016 resulted in a guilty plea, that was down to 10,104 in 2020 and 9,280 in 2022. That is an enormous change. What explains it, and what is the impact? Maybe each of you, starting with Professor Thompson, to talk about that.
Sure. Well, we have to keep in mind that first in 2017 we had Hurricane Harvey, which closed the criminal courts for 18 months. So that had dramatic impact on the criminal justice system, you know, to begin with. Then, as soon as the courthouse opened, you know, within a year or less, the pandemic hit, which again closed down the courts. So why are we dismissing misdemeanors? Because we can't even try felonies, much less deal with you know, low-level criminality. And during the pandemic, also, you know, reoffending in the misdemeanor space generally went down. It went up in some DWIs and domestic violence cases, but otherwise went down. So it, you know, I guess I would just start by saying we can't just look at O'Donnell for the explanations. It's very complicated to say what's going on here. But clearly, people are not having to plead guilty because they're stuck in jail like they used to. There's also a lot more programmatic, rehabilitative interventions going on pre-trial. So the district attorney's office is, you know, happy to dismiss cases when people are out and they're getting their lives back in order. Why do you want to go forward with a little misdemeanor case when it's just going to set them back?
Judge, how is this affecting particularly the decline in guilty pleas?
Right. There's I think a collective, right, that would contribute to that. Number one, as a result of O'Donnell, we have attorneys so that when the person is arrested in our JPC, Joint Processing Center, so at the magistrate level now, defendants have representation. So number one, right, in many cases, if they are filed without merit, that's a stopgap right there. That can get a number of cases dismissed. If the case then progresses on to the 16 county courts, we too are able to look at that and determine whether or not probable cause is there. I mean, if you're not stuck in jail, you have the more opportunity to fight your case and present it and have an attorney appointed to represent you and allow your case to go forward without having the socioeconomic issue hold you back. And so as far as the backlog goes itself, really I'll give all credit to my 15 colleagues in driving really hard dockets and monitoring the timeline. Many of us have several different court practices that we've used to include scheduling orders to drive forward, you know, just really getting to the end of it all, justice.
Well, let me follow up, just to give people a sense of the magnitude of what we're talking about. Again, from the report, in 2015, 60% of misdemeanor cases resulted in a conviction. It is now down to 22%. The share of misdemeanor cases acquitted or dismissed increased from 31% in 2015 to 76% in 2022. I mean, that is it's almost unfathomable how big a difference. And is that, in your view, essentially that people were forced either to plead guilty or could not mount an effective defense?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in 2017, I was a defense attorney, so I know what that felt like. I know what we were sort of conditioned to accept walking into different courts, and quite frankly, with the introduction of O'Donnell and the consent decree and our Rule 9, it, as you said, turned the system upside down. And it just opened the door so that everyone had an opportunity to argue whatever it is that they wanted to just have that opportunity to have your day in court.
Yeah. Krish, how do you view the changes of this magnitude?
I mean, it's fantastic, right? It's amazing, the magnitude, and yet the narrative in the public is so disconnected from the facts. That's what's frustrating for all of us, is to see this enormous, I mean, it's a really simple but enormous reform with huge impacts to keep families together. But you don't see that. You don't see that publicly spoken about. What you see are all the outlier sensational cases. And so, I actually wanted to talk about today, our jail population is almost 10,000. Back when Hurricane Harvey was hit, we were actually down to about 6,000. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why that might have happened. The cops were not harassing people, they were actually helping them. But we are up to 10,000 people now, so much so that we are housing people pre-trial in Louisiana and Mississippi, about 1,300 people pre-trial.
Well, how is that happening in light of all the other figures that we're talking about?
It's not misdemeanors.
It's not
That's
misdemeanors.
why.
Right.
It's not
It's
misdemeanors.
right.
It's felony.
It's felonies,
felony.
and I wanted to say it's at a cost of $50.3 million to the taxpayers, and the money is going to private prison companies, and this brings us to the point of how misdemeanor bail reform changed behavior. It changed law enforcement behavior. It changed the DA office behavior. I think it was last week or something, we had this huge front page news about the DA's office. I think in 2022, they had 4,500 cases for which the judges found no probable cause. They were just thrown out. I mean, they're overcharging. Law enforcement is overcharging.
So you're saying
and the
it's
DA is
changed their
overcharging.
behavior in a positive way or a
That's
negative
the
way?
unintended consequence, because I think a lot of people did not like the fact that we had misdemeanor bail reform. And I think the reason for that, and this is just my opinion, but the bail bond industry took a huge hit. I mean, their profits went down from $3.5 million in 2015 to barely $500,000 in 2019. That's an enormous hit.
Is that that's in the county?
That's just Harris
Yeah.
County, not even the
Right,
state.
right.
And so,
But
I mean,
to make sure I understand, are you saying that police and prosecutors are kind of upcharging to felonies because they don't want people to be, I mean, what were you saying,
so
how it's affecting their
anecdotally,
behavior?
what we hear from people is that, oh, you're going to get out on this misdemeanor. I'm going to charge you with slightly higher. So it's a felony, then you're not getting
Yeah.
out. Because if I charge you with a misdemeanor, you're going to be out, in 24 hours. And they hate that. Law enforcement hates that. I mean, that's just the truth of it.
Well-
It's anecdotal. But then if you look at this data, I mean, if you take such a huge hit in your profits, the bail bond industry is now driving that conversation all the way from here to the legislature, where they're literally writing bills
Now-
because they've lost profits.
Let me ask you from the other side, though, perspective. Misdemeanors do encompass a wide array of offenses. I mean, assault cases, weapons violations, both of those are up. Theft and trespass are down, but in the report, again, the number of assault cases has increased from 7574 in 15 to 12326 in 23. That's a significant increase. Does the consent decree, as a judge, give you enough flexibility when dealing with people who may represent different levels of threat to the community?
Sure, it does. I mean, we didn't lose our ability to have our discretion in terms of how we handle these cases once they hit court. But again, I think we're still talking apples and oranges. I work with what happens in court once it gets to court.
Yeah.
We're not law enforcement in that, judges aren't patrolling the neighborhoods
Right.
trying to stop crime. That's not how that works. We deal with what comes to us. But one point that people should really realize is that at some point it was reported in the media, true or not, that violent crime was on the rise. As a result, they would say, of bail bond reform. But bail bond reform didn't happen everywhere, and yet there was a rise in crime across the nation, right? COVID really introduced a lot of different responses, and so that rise in crime was a national issue, but they took the opportunity to say, oh, it had to be bail bond reform, when quite frankly, I believe it was just the opposite. Certainly, I would say so in 2019, 2020. There may have been some trending on some violent crimes to go up, but primarily they went down.
Yeah, just to go back though to your earlier point about dismissals, I mean, I would just add that people have always gotten their cases dismissed when they had the money to get out of jail, and they had lawyers, right? And so part of the result of this is truly equal justice. Now, whether we like the justice or not is a different question, but there was a criminologist back in the 60s who said pretrial is everything, because whether you stayed in jail or not affected everything downstream, from whether you got it dismissed, or there was a conviction, or whether we were imprisoned or not, or whether, what was the length of the sentence. All of these factors were dramatically affected by that initial decision. And so, I think we also forget that a lot of people who are charged with crimes, well, first of all, they're presumed innocent, but a lot of them can be factually innocent too. And that was shown in Houston very dramatically by a ProPublica study. It came out in an article because people were pleading guilty to felony drug charges in Houston because they were getting arrested on the basis of a faulty field test that police officers were using. And years later, when the lab had the capacity to test it, they found that hundreds of these cases had no drugs. And the people had pled guilty to felonies. I mean, this is not, when the judge says people pled guilty because they felt compelled because they were stuck in jail, we know this is an absolute truth, even when they're innocent.
We're going to bring in the audience in a minute, but Krish, can I ask you, the state of Texas has not been shy about preempting decisions made by their largest cities and counties. Here in Harris County, they've taken over the school system. They've eliminated the county clerk, the elections position. There's all sorts of preemption on matters large and small, from banning plastic bags for recycling to overriding local decisions on mandating water breaks for construction workers. And yet, this consent decree with bail reform has survived here in Texas for 5 years now? Mm-hmm. How has this survived, and how has the state taken aim at it, and if so, why is it still standing?
I don't know why it's still standing. I think that's a better question for Sandy, because I think it's federal, but the state has taken an aim at it. The last 2 legislative sessions, we've seen the legislature come really strongly at community bail funds, and they've been really upset about our bail reform, which again, has been only misdemeanor bail reform. Mm. But because of the kind of influence that the bail bond industry has in our political system, they try to pass several laws to make sure that this good reform would not spread to the rest of the state. So,
have they in fact passed?
They did pass. So 2 sessions ago, we passed SB 6,
right.
And there's many horrible things in SB 6, but one of the provisions which is being interpreted by other counties is that even if you're arrested for a misdemeanor now, but if you have a felony in your past, you cannot be released on a PR bond. So, so I sit on the Texas Commission on Jail Standards Rulemaking and Administrative Advisory Committee now. And when we go to the jail commission meetings, a lot of the small jails which are non-compliant because they're overcrowded, overpopulated, can't maintain conditions. They've been complaining for the past year and a half that I can't do anything because of SB 6. I have all these people with misdemeanors in my jail who cannot get PR bonds, so we can't let them out. And so now my jail's not compliant, it's not my fault, and then we need a bigger jail. That's the next step,
Usually
right?
the next thing.
Right. So I think that was the state's way of, and they also tried to pass a constitutional amendment which would completely eliminate bail for certain types of charges, which we managed to beat every session. But we have watched very closely the DA's office working with legislators to really push back hard on this good reform that we've had.
So explain how this has survived SB 6 and the state in general.
Well, I mean, Krish is right. It's a federal consent decree, and it was entered into before SB 6. And so, as a federal consent decree, it's still in play. It doesn't get overruled by state law. But I mean, largely the terms of the consent decree don't conflict with SB 6. And so, there's a requirement that, for example, they put in this new requirement for what's called a public safety report. And the idea was to sort of send the message that judges weren't taking public safety into account, which of course wasn't true because there was no judge in a big county or a tiny rural county who wasn't checking the person's criminal history. So it was a false narrative, and it created a lot of work for counties to create this new document that now has to be reviewed before they can make a decision on bail. So SB 6 is a lot of it's posturing.
I'm going to bring in the audience real quick, but if there are provisions of SB 6, like the one you mentioned, about limiting bail reform for people who have a prior felony, even if their current offense is a misdemeanor, if there are provisions of SB 6 that conflict with the consent decree, which wins?
Well, the consent decree wins, but I mean, it doesn't, and it was actually written to try to tailor with the consent decree largely, because that was a topic of discussion. So they're trying to do as much as they can, but they didn't take direct aim at O'Donnell at all.
Trish, real quick, can I ask you before? Are there other counties in Texas that would do this if SB 6 was not there blocking them?
I think they were trying before SB 6 went into play. Several counties were trying, and they all got shut down after that.
Yeah.
So.
All right, it's a little bright, but let's see if we can see. And if I can't see just raise your hand. We have people with mics. And are there questions? Definitely wave at us if there are questions for the mic runners.
Hi. I just wanted to go back to a detail that you mentioned, Chris, about the people who are being transported to other states who have been arrested for felonies. What happens, who's accountable for the conditions of the jails when they're in other states? Is that still Harris County? What do we know what's happening to those people while they await trial?
Did you get that? The question was, when people are being transported to other states now, who is responsible for their conditions and their treatment? Is it Harris County?
Thank you so much for that question, because that's exactly what we've been asking the county. And actually just today I got a records request response from LaSalle Corrections, which is the private prison company in Louisiana, where we're housing hundreds of folks. And they said, we don't have to provide you anything. All I asked for was your inmate handbook and grievance procedures and policies. And they said, we don't have to provide you anything because we're in Louisiana and you're in Texas. We don't have to follow Texas PIA. And I said, with due respect, here's the agreement between the county and you are actually allowed to, you have to follow Texas Public Information Act request. So we're just going back and forth, and nobody knows who's accountable. The sheriff's office thinks that it's the jail commission. The jail commission says it's not our job because it's outside the state. And in fact, 2 people have died in LaSalle, in Louisiana, people that we arrested, we held here, and then we transported on our taxpayer dollars. But as soon as they died, they literally don't count. We don't have to count their deaths. We don't have to report their deaths. We don't have to investigate their deaths. And these are pre-trial. And so that's the consequence of over-incarceration. And I won't say overcrowding or understaffing, because there are several dorms in our jail that are actually empty. They've been shut down because we don't have the staff to meet the mandated ratio between a jailer and the incarcerated people. But the consequence of all this change in law enforcement behavior and DA's behavior has been a 10,000 population, about 6,300 today that are pre-trial, and about 1,300 that are shipped out of county, and 2 sites are out of state. So
Is the felony misdemeanor proportion presumably has changed quite a bit
Hugely.
over
Oh, yeah.
time?
I mean, yeah, virtually no one's in the jail just because of a misdemeanor. I mean, we really don't have anybody in there who's just charged with, if they're charged with a misdemeanor and they're there, it's because they have
felon
another
pending.
warrant somewhere else, there's an ICE hold for immigration, or they have a companion felony case.
Okay, let's see. Do we have another question? And please just start, because we're having trouble seeing you through the lights. If you've got a mic and a question. Is there something? Anyone? No?
we were just that good with
We were
explaining
that
them.
good? Yeah,
We have one over here.
okay, go ahead.
Thank you. You just said that there were basically no misdemeanors held. What about domestic violence cases where you have concerns about victim safety? How do you handle that if there's no possibility of incarceration or pretrial incarceration?
Thank you for the question. No, there is an opportunity for pretrial incarceration. So we should be clear that under the terms of the consent decree, misdemeanor cases that represent a public safety risk, like domestic violence cases, are called carve-out cases. So they are carved out of the system that would otherwise allow them to be more quickly released without having to pay. So anyone charged with a domestic violence case, if they're already out on a bond when they get arrested, or a number of other factors that, where we know that there's a public safety issue, those cases will go to a magistrate judge. And the magistrate judge, and there'll be a public defender there to assist them, but nonetheless, the magistrate has all of the normal tools at their discretion, and so it is not uncommon for them to give someone like that a surety bond, to require, to have protective orders, other conditions of, pretrial supervision and the like. So they're not handled really any differently than they would have been before O'Donnell.
Judge,
Right.
you seen that?
Right, you mentioned a good part of that, but the carve-outs, right? But in constructing the consent decree, or putting together what is our Rule 9, which details how we handle these types of cases, the carve-outs, judges discuss what were cases that we would consider to be most dangerous to the community. Those are carve-outs. What that means is it's going to get the extra look. It's not going to get the automatic, here you are, you can be released from jail. It gives a judge an opportunity to put an individual eye on that case, learn about the facts, the criminal history, what dangers, if any, there are, and then we can assess what pretrial services should be to go along with that. It may be that the person is released on a PR bond or a surety bond, but we can assess conditions that can help ensure further safety. So it didn't go away. It never went away from the start of it, and public safety was at the forefront as well.
We're nearing the end of our time, and you guys are nearing the end of your whole time here. So let me ask each of our panelists maybe for one kind of closing thought on what would be the most important next step that you can see to advance the kind of reform that Harris County has been able to achieve. What's the next most important thing to do, maybe starting with?
I think I have spent more than 10 years talking to people about bail issues, and I fully believe that we could have consensus across the political spectrum if people really understood the issues. This is not something that should divide us. But I think it's just really, really challenging to figure out how to get. Krish does an amazing job because she's a storyteller through her advocacy. They do incredible work of storytelling, and if people really understood the issues, they would agree with this.
Krish?
I totally agree. I mean, the debate on this should be over on bail reform. If people who are paying attention, they know it's worked for public safety. It has kept families together, and it has cut costs. We are now able to use those resources in actually fighting, actual crime, not going after nuisance cases. And speaking of stories, if folks are here today, I want to invite you all to come to the screening of Texas Freedom Stories. We're launching the success stories of misdemeanor bail reform this evening, and we can send you the information if you're interested. But it's 6 to 9 p.m. at 14 pews, and these are just really mundane, everyday faces of bail reform, where people were able to go back to their communities and their homes and, not have their life exploded. As the judge was saying earlier, their lives literally explode when you're stuck in jail for more than 2, 3, 4 days. And so I think that debate on public safety is over. We know it works, we just need to expand it. And I really wish we had not done the line drawing of misdemeanor and felony. I wish we had just done bail reform like Illinois did. So envious of them.
Judge?
We've got to get back to humanity. The bottom line is somewhere along the way we thought, somewhere along the way we thought that caging people was a way to make us safe, or was the only way to make us safe. And that's never been it. We need to provide resources to people so that they can be productive citizens, and just realize that humanity is where it's at. And then trust your judges to do what you elected them to do. Because, we live in the neighborhoods too. So it is insane to think that public safety is not important to us. My robe is not bulletproof. So I care very much about my colleagues, and I care very much about what our community, the safety of our community. So trust us, but get back to true humanity across the board.
A good final word. Would you join me in thanking this terrific panel? And I think Lori is going to give us some final words.
Thank you so much again to our panel for sharing the story of bail reform in Harris County and letting us hear about both the successes and also the work we still have to do here and around the country for that humanity that the judge spoke of. We are reaching the end of our time together. I'm going to invite Lori up in a moment to wrap us up and bring us home. But first, I do want to thank everyone for all of your participation over the last few days. I hope that you have had the chance to tell your SJC story, that you've met someone new, that you've learned something new, that you've eaten well. And I would especially like to thank all of you that have participated as faculty over the past few days, that have shared a poster, since that really is the heart of this experience, and it is because of everyone's collective input into all of this that this event turns out as wonderful as it does. So if we could have a round of applause for everybody that participated as faculty over the last couple days. And of course, I have to go back to our leaderboard, because Neangela will not forgive me if I forget to share the folks who are most active in the app over the past few days. So we have Jared Anderson from Douglas County, who was in 3rd place for most active. I don't know if Jared is here. Tara Anderson from Alameda County. I assume there's no relation there. And still Niles Hamer from East Baton Rouge, who is sitting up at the top. So y'all have a whole year to figure out, is Niles going to stay there for 2025, or are we going to have an opportunity to be able to see someone move ahead? I think this is a three-peat for Niles, so he is our Hoover King. All of the materials from the last few days will be available both in Hoover and on SJC Exchange. If there's anybody new to the network that is not a member of SJC Exchange, please join, and you can visit all of the materials from every convening that we've had, as well as a really great archive and an opportunity to connect with folks from across the network. So this does not have to be your last chance to be able to get together, to talk to each other, and to learn about what's going on throughout the network. We hope that you all will stay connected throughout the year as well. And as you head out, safe travels. Box lunches are available outside. And I'd love to welcome Lori Garducki up to the stage to finish us out this afternoon. Welcome, Lori.
So y'all made it back, huh? So the rustic sounded like it was a pretty good party last night. Would you give me some sense of how y'all enjoyed yourself? Was it a good one? Can you guys make the font a little bit bigger on the screen for me, please?